Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar hosted by the Young Europeans Network on voting rights and belonging, where we're going to be taking a look at the Elections Bill. My name's Maddie Desi. I am running the media and engagement on the Young Europeans Network's campaign for residence-based voting rights in elections in England and Northern Ireland. So I'm sure if you follow our social medias or have been following any of the Free Millions work, you've heard a lot of chatter. You've heard a lot of chatter about residence-based voting rights and the campaign that we're currently hosting for it. And tonight, this event will explain exactly what residence-based voting rights is and why it's an issue, and why right now it's an issue, and what exactly our campaign is doing about this. So we've got a great panelist of guest speakers also involved in this webinar tonight. But firstly, before you all hear from them, we'd just like to launch a poll asking 2 questions about the Elections Bill. So I'm just going to pop up the first question now.
Sorry, don't wait to launch the first. Oh, go on.
Sorry, Lara, do you want to? Should we launch it? Yeah.
No.
Okay. If they're not up, someone let me know. But the first question is, how much do you know about your current voting rights in the UK? So we'll just wait for all of these to come in.
And we've got some not at all. Don't worry, your answers.
Okay, thank you so much to everyone answering. Okay, so we've I'm gonna pop out the results now. Yeah. Sorry. Okay, so we've got quite a bit of a mixture of these results. I don't know if they're showing up on everyone else's screens now, hopefully. And then we'd also like to bring in a second question, which is, what do you know about the changes that the Elections Bill is currently bringing? Sorry, Laura, do you want to put up the second question?
Yeah. Okay. Second poll is launched. Oh, I like the nothing at all, because that means that we're doing something right today. I mean, there's so many bills going to Parliament right now that it's difficult to keep track of all that's happening. And we're not even going to talk about the whole extent of the bill, just a little part of it, but it's a good start.
Yeah, it's a very wide-ranging bill, but this is one part of the bill that we're currently focused on, and also hasn't been touched on a lot. So hopefully we'll explain a bit more about how it does impact EU citizens' voting rights tonight. Okay, so we're just sharing the results of the second poll here. So what our webinar will be addressing is, hopefully at the end of this, you'll know a bit more about the Elections Bill and your own voting rights. So throughout the webinar tonight, we're going to have different speakers. Lara is going to be starting by speaking and explaining the issues here and what our campaign is. But I'd also just like to say, throughout the webinar, feel free to comment at all in the chat, but we've also got a Q&A function, which I hope you'll be using to ask any questions. So just keep any comments to chat and questions to Q&A, if that's okay. Also, at the end of the event, near the end of the event, we're going to have an easy retro type of more open question and answer thing where you can share your own thoughts about residence-based voting rights and the changes of the election bill. So there's quite a few ways to interact throughout the webinar. If you're confused about any of these things, just ask questions on the chat, and the Europeans Network's volunteers can answer those for you. But main questions about for the panelists or on any of our topics tonight, just pop in the Q&A. Brilliant. I hope that's okay with everyone. So leading on from these questions and looking and to hopefully change everyone's lack of knowledge about the Elections Bill, Lara Parazotto, co-manager of the Young Europeans Network and leader on the residence-based voting rights campaign being hosted by us, is going to give us a presentation about this.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm going to share my screen because I've got some cute images to show everyone. So yes. So the Our Home, Our Vote campaign was launched in August last year, 2020. And at first, it was very much just focused about encouraging EU citizens to register to vote. At that point, we didn't know whether the rights of EU citizens in the UK were going to be kept due to the UK's departure from the European Union. But our main idea was, at the moment, for the next local elections in May 2021, you have that vote, so do make sure to exercise that. We had to talk about the Elections Bill. So I'm sure that lots of you have seen lots of headline news about the Elections Bill, lots of it focused on photo ID, the Electoral Commission, campaigning finances, some very scary headlines, some more supportive of it. I think most people would agree that elections and how we conduct elections in the UK is in need of reform. But the practicalities of that, of all of the aspects of the bill, we will not cover today. We'll talk about how the bill affects us as EU citizens and migrants in the UK. So we're concerned with the part of the bill, the Schedule 7, Part 1, of Part 2 of the bill that talks about the voting and candidacy rights of EU citizens and how that will change. So this is a complicated table of how voting rights are currently carried out in the UK. Essentially, if you're a British citizen, you can vote at any election anywhere, and that's great. If you are an EU citizen who has entered the UK by the 31st of December 2020, and you have either pre-settled or settled status, you can continue having the right to vote in local elections, as we hopefully most of you have done, because we have encouraged everyone to register to vote and to vote. So hopefully you've done that. And if you have that status and you have entered the UK by 31st of December 2020, you will continue having that right to vote. Now, if the election bill passes, which is very likely to, EU citizens that enter the UK from 2021 onwards, as in this year, under the new immigration system, so with a student visa or a worker's visa and not having settled or pre-settled status, they will not automatically have the right to vote in local elections. They will only have the right to vote in local elections if they come from a country that has a bilateral voting rights agreement with the UK. At the moment, those countries with bilateral agreements with the UK are only Poland, Luxembourg, Spain, and Portugal. So we're talking about a scenario where one Italian citizen, like myself, will have the right to vote in the UK, but someone entering the UK today will not have that right to vote. And then you've got the addition of Commonwealth citizen and Irish citizens that have the same right to vote as British. But you can see that in Scotland and Wales, we've got a lot more green ticks than the rest of the elections. And that's because in the elections of the devolved national elections, they've got something called, or we're calling it, residence-based voting rights. So any qualifying foreign national can vote in those elections. And to us, that is a fairer, simpler system, because I think you can see just of me explaining this right now how complicated it would be for someone to understand whether or not they have that right to vote. They need to consider if they have the right status, if they enter the UK by the right date, if their country has a bilateral agreement with the UK or not. I think for the average voter, that would be complicated. For politicians, that would be complicated. And for those managing elections, it would be complicated. And just in practice, how will these things be carried out during the election time? So in comparison to that, so there's just a few photos of us doing voter registration sessions. We did it in Peterborough, Northampton, Corby, and London. And before the May elections 2022, we'll be doing it again. Maybe same places, maybe different places, but that's just like we do care a lot about getting people registered to vote and their rights in the UK. And instead of what we've got right now, our proposal is what you can see here. If you are a qualifying foreign national, you should have the right to vote in the UK in local elections. So local elections, we're talking about those elections that manage your council, things like your local parks, your roads, transport, housing. Gio, our councillor here, will talk more about this later. But basically, if you live somewhere, if you pay your council tax, if you use those public services, we believe that you should have a say. You should have a vote. You should have a democratic voice in how things are carried out. And then the residence-based voting rights is something that, as I said, already exists in Scotland and Wales, exists within the UK. So it's doable. And it exists in other EU and non-EU countries as well. So this is just to say that it's not something unheard of. It's a doable thing that we were proposing. And we're also very, very happy to announce that we conducted a poll with Number Cruncher, and the results came out, as you can see on the screen. 63% of people agree that all residents should have the right to vote in local elections. And that's really, really brilliant, positive news, because they were always often a bit scared that the general public will be against migrants or anti the rights of migrants. And this shows the opposite. People are in favor of a democratic system that includes people rather than excludes them. This is just a quote from an academic that says basically the same thing, like if you a democratic system that works should include everyone in the community. And just briefly, how many people would be enfranchised if our campaign worked? So in England alone, close to 1 million people would receive the right to vote if we had a system of elections that would allow any resident, no matter where they're from, to have their right to vote. So I'm talking about someone from Brazil, someone from America, Russia, and so on. In London alone, 337,000. So yeah, lots of people here that we're talking about, and we want to keep including people in the franchise. We're again talking about over 1 million people that could gain that right to vote. So I'll pause for now. You'll hear from me again later, but for now, that's all.
Thank you, Lara, for explaining a bit more about residence-based voting rights and also what the Elections Bill is doing in terms of voting rights for EU citizens. So now I'd like to, what we heard in what Lara said was that this has already been done in the UK. Scotland and Wales have systems of residence-based voting rights. And now I'd like to pass on to Michael Russell, who is president of the SNP and former cabinet member in the Scottish Government and instrumental in making residence-based voting rights a reality in Scotland. So I'd like to pass on to Michael Russell to talk about this.
Thank you very much indeed. And first of all, can I say how much I support this campaign? I'm not in a position to do anything about it immediately, having retired from frontline politics, but I do think it's a campaign that gets to the very heart about what democracy is. First of all, before I go on and explain that, I just want to say that the presentation you've just had is very accurate. And what it reflects is that where the Scottish Parliament or the Welsh Senate have control of their own franchise, they are able to do this. And they have done it, and we have done it in a particularly radical way in Scotland. Where they do not have control of the franchise is for Westminster elections, because that control lies at Westminster. So we are talking in Scotland still about one set of elections in which people who are resident in the country cannot vote, and that is Westminster elections. Those elections, and it's not a coincidence, are also run by first past the post voting system, probably the least fair voting system that exists. So Westminster is very archaic in how it approaches democracy. It's also, incidentally, very archaic in how it votes as a parliament. It's still, people still queue up and walk through voting lobbies, and takes them hours and hours and hours and hours. Whereas in the Scottish Parliament, Welsh Assembly, and in modern parliaments, people vote electronically and can get through a great deal more work. But let me just address the democratic issues, because your own website actually expresses this really well. talking about residence-based voting rights being fair, simpler, and contributing to levelling up. And at the heart of that is a very simple concept. Who should make decisions about what happens in a country? Should it be people who live in that country, people who actually are there and who will be affected by whatever the decision is in an election? Or should there be an element in which people do not live in the country, have no responsibility for it, will not be affected by what takes place? And I think it's absolutely clear that the decision about how countries are run, how governments are chosen, what governments do, should lie with the people who are directly elected. Who knows more about what should happen in that country than those who are there day in and day out? So the concept of citizenship as being the sole qualification for voting is a very outmoded one. It doesn't recognize what a modern democracy is about, because democracy does, as your website says, work better when everyone participates. And encouraging people to participate means giving them the right to choose a government, not just to choose though it's important to local authority, not just to choose though I believe in Scottish independence, so I think the Scottish government should have all the powers, but presently the Welsh and Scottish governments do not have full powers, not just that, but in actual fact to choose a government with all the powers. So it is a fairer approach. It is also, and your website again is right, a simpler approach. One of the issue of how elections are run is a complex one. And as the Minister had responsibility for electoral matters over a period of time in the Scottish Parliament, I know how important the returning officers are and those who work for them. And the constant advice that they give to ministers is keep the system as simple as possible. Don't complicate the system, because the more you complicate the system, the less easy it is to run. There is a very, very limited amount of electoral fraud within the UK as a whole. And that is why the issue of having a photo ID for voting is so ridiculous. It's not required in any sense. And it is a barrier to voting, but it also complicates matters. So keep the system simple. And the simplest system of all is to have everybody voting. Now, there will be exemptions. The exemptions in Scotland are for those who are asylum seekers without the right to remain. And that is a practical issue. Again, on the advice of returning officers, that it is very difficult to identify those people and indeed for them to stand for election, because there should also be no barrier and no difference between voting and being eligible to be elected. That is the same issue, it's participation in democracy. So a simple system is absolutely right. And levelling up is also an interesting idea. Globally now, there is a movement towards residential voting rights. Scotland has one of the most radical systems in the world, but not the most radical system in the world. And indeed, if we are going to have fairer societies and more equal societies, and certainly I believe we have a long way to go, but we have to do that, then that also means making sure that citizens are empowered and that citizens are all empowered equally. And there are no second-class citizens. So as far as I'm concerned, this is a no-brainer. The campaign that you're fighting is the right campaign. Unfortunately, you're fighting it against a government that isn't listening at the present moment, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't fight that campaign. In fact, you should be as loud as possible in making sure that you have it, because you do want other parties at Westminster to take this on too, and you want them to support this so that when, over time, there will be the development of a fairer system. I am, finally, was and am implacably opposed to Brexit. I think it's a backward move and the people of Scotland voted against it. And I think the failure to include people in your democracy is part of the disease at present moment of trying to be apart from things. We need to embrace every citizen, and every citizen needs to be able to participate. And the most visible sign of participation is the ability to participate in democracy by making your choice, by lining up alongside every other citizen, every other person who lives in your street and in your town or your city, or in my case, in your rural area, and being there to vote. So I wish you all success with this. I'm very glad that Scotland has done what it's done. I would like to see the UK doing it for as long as Scotland is part of the UK. But once Scotland has the control of all its elections, then it will do that.
Thank you so much for everything, Michael. I thought that was brilliant to hear about not only how you believe in it, but also how it came to be and that it did come into force. And we hope to see a lot more residence-based voting rights in the future. So I'd now like to pass on to Ashley. So Ashley is one of the people actually affected by this, and she's just going to talk a bit more about her own experiences here. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, thanks a lot for this opportunity. So yeah, my name is Aslı and I am from Istanbul, Turkey. And I have moved to UK permanently in 2018. And unfortunately, I don't have a right to vote in elections. I mean, I can count many reasons why I want to be able to vote in local elections, but I genuinely believe that giving right to vote to migrants like myself is good for everyone. So I will just stick to 3 reasons and go from there. So I think by giving a right to vote to migrants, or by giving a voice to migrants, we make local politics much more inclusive. Like Michael already said, like, we know if you want to make road closures or build a park in a local environment, you should probably, it's a good practice to first ask people who live in that neighborhood or use that roadside. And as migrants, we are not really guests, so we pay council tax. And as a migrant myself, I would like to be able to support the policies that I favor, and I want to become a more active participant of the society as well. And although I've been living in the UK for almost 4 years, I haven't been able to do so. And I think it's one of the most effective ways of doing this is being able to vote. And second point is something related to this. I think integration does not happen overnight, and political engagement is a crucial step towards achieving active citizens. And when I speak with my foreign friends, like friends from Turkey, for instance, I realize that they don't know much about UK politics. And honestly, I don't blame them because they are also not able to vote in elections. But when I say this, I'm not saying that they don't know about the problems of the society they live in, or they don't care about the problems of the society, or they don't have any ideas. But I think if they were able to vote, they would consider the candidates or policies, and at the end of that process, they will become much more active citizens and be politically engaged in the society they live in. And this really takes time. Political engagement really takes time, and waiting for citizenship is a bit too late, I think. And you don't get to know the politics of your society by a magical wand when you spend 5 years in a country. And for many migrants like myself, the immigration path is not linear. So, for instance, in my case, I won't become a citizen until I spend 7-8 years in this country because I pay visa tax, for instance. So this is not a linear path, and I really believe that it should come much more beforehand than spending 5 years in the country. And lastly, I want to be able to vote because, like, I was thinking of this topic, and I realized that I really care about this society, and I consider London as my home, or UK as my home. And sometimes when you read online commentaries, maybe you shouldn't, but you realize that some people think this as a way to complain about the society or the country you live in. But I mean, not that I think we shouldn't complain. I think it's a good thing to do. But I also think that this is not a complaining, but it is, I really care about this issue, and I want to be able to vote because I care about this society, and I really want to make it better for not just myself, but for everyone. And I think being able to vote in local elections is a great way of achieving this much more inclusive and society, and creating active citizens from migrants who see this country as their home. So yeah, I guess that's all I wanted to say today, and thank you.
Thank you so much for speaking. It was also really, really great to hear a bit more about why citizenship shouldn't be the only criteria for voting. I think a lot of the some of the criticism we've had, or like questions we faced about this campaign, has been, why not just get citizenship, and so you can be able to vote. And it's good, it's good to elaborate a bit more on why that isn't quite as straightforward as it may be to ask that question. So thank you so much, and thank you for your sharing your experiences with us here tonight as well. So I'd now like to pass on to Sanaz. So they're a campaigner in Germany, currently campaigning for the inclusion of all migrants in the franchise, like us. So it would be brilliant for them to share their point of view, and thank you so much.
Hi, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for organizing this event today. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here because I think it's a really interesting exchange, especially because it has this vibe of transnationality, which is actually what is really, really important in our campaign, and I guess also in your campaign. Because I see, and I mean, in our campaign, we really try to look at the subject of of voting rights as a way of political participation that is not supposed to be connected to the certain citizenship. And that's the whole essential of our campaign. So our campaign is called, in German, it's called Nicht ohne uns 14%, which means in English, it means not without us 14%, because in the election that happened actually around a month ago in Germany, 14% of the German population, which is around 10 million people, were not allowed to take part in the federal election and in the communal election. And many of these 10 million people actually are the people who were born or spent a very or were grown up or spent a really long time in Germany. And most of the people from this 10 million people are also people who lived longer than actually 5 years in Germany, which means people are actually directly affected, not just by migration and asylum politics, but also any kind of politics that is being discussed in the German government, in the German federal parliament. And so what we try to do is that we started with an online campaign, which I can send you the link. It's a petition on change.org. We started to do that because we wanted to first raise awareness for that issue. And of course, it's not the first time that this issue is being discussed. There were many people, and for especially many migrant initiatives and organizations who try to bring awareness to that topic. But also we tried, after that, we organized several demonstrations, events, and tried to come into contact with also a lot of political parties, because we thought that is also, I mean, one part is the civil society and what we can do from the side of the civil society, but another part is that this subject should not always just be the subject of the people who are affected by this. Because I mean, in general, we see that also as being excluded from such an important political event means also being excluded and marginalized in a systematical level in a society. So for that, it's also really important that there would be a possibility of a systematic also change, which can come from the side of the political parties. And there were, from the experience, I can say that there were lots of different reactions to that campaign, and we got a lot of media attention, of course. And of course, there were also a lot of very, very much hate comments, and also people who were actually against it. And this topic came up several times in the German parliament in the past, and most of the political parties were against it. So how the situation is right now is that 3 of the 5 political parties in Germany are actually somehow supporting our campaign, in a sense that there's just one political party who is directly supporting our demand, which is right to vote for all of the residents who are living in Germany for more than 5 years, which is the Left Party of Germany. And they're supporting directly our demand, and the other parties are trying to make the naturalizations process easier and trying to go that way. And because right now in Germany, I think I would say as same as UK, the process of naturalization is a very hard process, and it is connected again to a lot of privilege. So in order to be, which means that which makes this whole process also again about discrimination and privilege, because in order to get the citizenship, you need to have certain privileges, like having, for example, a certain amount of income, or having a certain amount of German knowledge, or and in most of the cases also in Germany, you need to give up your old citizenship, which means for most of the people who have migration background and or have, for example, another citizenship, it's a very big decision if they want to give up their other nationality or not. So what right now the other political parties, like the Green Party and the Social Democrat, are doing is that they're trying to reduce these barriers, and they're trying to also reduce the amount of years that one should spend in order to apply for naturalization. But we still want to go on with the campaign and try to fight for our demand, not just because, and I mean, we try to also have a critical look on or a critical perspective about voting and voting rights, because a lot of times voting will be presented as the most important political impact that each citizen can have, which also at the same time is a very, it's not a very systematic, like it doesn't really criticize the system itself. So for that we need to, or our approach is to just use also this voting right as an example of again systematic discrimination in a society, to actually raise awareness also for having access to political spaces, representation of the migrants in the society, and also to bring more awareness to intersectional social justice, because again, in the topic of voting rights, there's still a lot of other categories or other categories that gives people certain privileges. And for example, most of the people who are actually not have voting rights are the people who have low income. So that brings also another categories, like, and most of the people who, for example, have the lower income are the women who have to, are single mothers who have to take care of their children, which brings again certain other categories into that. So yeah, I think my 5 minutes is done.
Thank you so much for that, Sanaz. So I'd just like to remind everyone watching tonight, if you've got any questions, please pop them in the Q&A function. So thank you so much for speaking. Then I'm just going to pass over now to Hen, who is somebody who actually can vote as a result of this. So a bit of a success story. So thanks, Hen, if you want to kick it off.
Yeah, thank you. So hi, I'm Hern. I was born in England. I've lived in Scotland since I was 4, so that's almost 21 years, but I'm Icelandic, and I've only just voted for the first time ever anywhere this year in May in Scottish elections, and I was very happy to do so. So it is the case that I would have to get British citizenship and sit a Life in the UK citizenship test to be able to have voting rights in Westminster and in England. But it's something that, even though Iceland allows dual nationality, it's something I frankly didn't consider when I was younger. And it was only then when it came to being able to vote that I even thought about it. And I sat a practice test online, I read through the guides, and even though I've been through school in Scotland my whole life, I wasn't anywhere close to being able to pass that test. And it wasn't something I wanted to spend my time or my money on in the end. Which is really sad in terms of voting, but it's just something that I didn't want to have to do. I didn't think I had to do it. And I think that it shouldn't be a requirement to be able to vote. To be able to vote in Iceland, I would have to apply to vote there because I've never lived there. I would most likely be rejected because I've never lived there. But also voting in Iceland's it's not anything I've really had any interest in because I don't live there. The changes don't affect me. They might affect my family, but when you don't live in a country, it's very difficult to keep on top of what is going on in the political climate. And when you've lived somewhere else and you're living and working there, it's very easy to have those impact, like the politics impacts you. So it meant a lot more to me to be able to vote in Scotland than to be able to vote in Iceland. So I am glad to say that I have voted this year. My family have been able to vote, apart from my sister, who now lives in England. And even though she's grown up in Scotland, gone to school and university in Scotland, now she's living in England and she can't vote again. So she is even older than me and has never been able to vote anywhere. So I'm really hoping that this will change in the UK to benefit everybody who is here for however long they decide to live here for, because after all, they're choosing to live here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Hen. And also what you said about the fact that your sister wouldn't be able to vote because she lives in England and you're able to vote because you live in Scotland is what the levelling up part of our campaign is all about. At the end of the day, the election bill is a chance to reassess how we do elections, and you'd think that would mean moving forward in a direction that gets more people engaged democratically. And that is, at the end of the day, what this is all about. And we are now campaigning for a change that will help more people get involved democratically. Now, this campaign has got cross-party support. We've recently been published in politics.co.uk with support from a whole, support from a cross-party coalition of councillors, and Councillor Gio Spinella, who is here tonight, is one of the co-authors of this article and is going to talk a bit more about the impact of the elections bill locally. No, he's not. He's going to talk about the impact of residence-based voting rights in local elections. Thank you.
Well, thanks for that. For a minute there, I had a total panic attack. Oh my God, have I just wasted all these notes that I've been writing down? Well, hi, everybody. As a part Welsh, part Sicilian, who has also lived in, well, Italy, the UK, America, Luxembourg, and France, you will understand that I have some strong opinions when it comes to voting rights across international frontiers. One thing I like to start by saying is that, you know, local elections in England and the United Kingdom have always been a gateway to British democracy for hundreds and thousands of people who might not have had a chance to participate in other ways. This was, of course, when we were members of the European Union. So what this meant was that people could stand for election who could not stand in other, let's say, national elections. Obviously, in the previous model, for instance, Horn would not have been allowed to vote anyway, so I'm sorry for that, but it's good to know that this is increasing now. But yeah, so and if you think about it, effectively, local government, local councils end up having a larger mandate than most MPs, because our combined electorate is larger, because, you know, MPs in the United Kingdom can be only elected by British, Irish, and Commonwealth qualifying Commonwealth citizens. We councillors are elected also by, or were elected also by, EU nationals as well. So our mandate is inevitably wider. This is important because, as I said before, it enriches our democracy because it adds more voices to that. Looking at what's going to happen with the current bill, we can see inevitably levels of complexity which are not going to help us at all. I mean, we're going to have a situation where pre-2020 EU residents are okay, post-2020 EU residents who've just moved into are going to have a lot more problems. That's without even counting the fact that, you know, people like the Swiss or Norwegians who live in the United Kingdom might still continue to not have those rights. And so we want to reduce that complexity. You know, local authorities are actually very good in many cases at dealing with these challenges. A few years ago, individual electoral registration was introduced in this country, and despite concerns that were raised at the time, local government managed to put through a monumental effort to ensure that that new electoral requirement was met. But it did take a lot of time, it did take a lot of resources, and it did introduce complexity that is frankly perhaps not helpful at this moment. So we want, and you know, just another thought that occurred to me even as we were speaking today, even if somebody manages, a EU national manages to confirm their right to vote in one area, what happens when they move from one part of the country to another? It could be that all of a sudden the rights that they have accumulated, they have ascertained, might get lost. I know how easy it is when every year you have the rollover of the electoral register, how easy it is for names to get dropped off or addresses to get lost. And that's just, you know, the simple stuff. When you get to people moving from town to town or area to area, it even gets more complicated. So, you know, the point is that extending the franchise to residents, to all qualifying residents, is a way of ensuring a much more straightforward election process. And, you know, conversations about the type of election system used is a conversation perhaps for another day, but it's also a way of strengthening democracy. I had reason to mention this recently in a council meeting, that over the last few months and even years, we've seen what can feel like sometimes a retreat of democracy. A generation of achievements, of conquest of women's rights in Afghanistan, and even the LGBT rights in Afghanistan, have been wiped away now by the Taliban conquest and invasion. We have seen January of this year, the capital of the United States stormed by people who do not accept a democratic vote, an electoral result. We have seen how in Texas right now, apparently there's a bounty on anybody who might want to help a woman exercise their right to choose. And we can see the situations as they're involving in Poland or devolving, I would say, in Poland and in Hungary, just to say within the European context. Democracy at times feels as if it's in withdrawal. And this is an opportunity with this bill to expand democracy, to enrich it by adding even more voices to the ones that we've had over the years. So not just the EU nationals who, as one of myself, but okay, only part, but, as one who's also recruited other EU nationals to stand for us, I think of, I consider very important, but also, yes, those Norwegians, those Swiss, but also those Americans, those Japanese, those Koreans. And talking about the fight for democracy, I would also raise this point here. In my North London constituency area, we have lots of Russians, we have Chinese, we have Iranians, we have people who have not actually necessarily experienced what we might consider to be genuine democracies. The moment they get engaged in the democratic process, even at the local administration, is a moment in which the practice of democracy, of free elections, can be acquired. And hopefully all those people will one day go back, if they ever choose to go back to their countries of birth and origin, they may become agents of democracy, subversively sharing their practices and the habits that they've acquired, speaking about influencing the local communities. And just a reminder to anybody who thinks, oh, local government, just remember that local government, we run roads, street cleaning, cleanliness, rubbish collection, public health, social housing, the running of the state schools, your planning, your licensing. I could go on for a very long list of all the things local government does. When you live in an area, this is what the local council does. So it's only fair that anybody who lives here has a right and a say in it. I will finish very quickly with just two more points, please. Sorry. The one is that speaking as someone who grew up in the States, one of the American battle cries 250 years ago was no taxation without representation. And when you think of it, that was a bunch of people of a local authority complaining that they were being taxed but had no say in the running of that country. As a result of that, those local authorities rebelled, and we had the United States of America that emerged because the then English government was not listening. I would hope that 250 years later, the British government will have learned that lesson and adopt fully the principle of no taxation without representation. And finally, very last point, as I said this in another conference organized by the 3 Million and the Young European Network, those of you who have the right to vote at all times, exercise it. Local government engagement is very low, and at times the, especially with EU nationals and foreign nationals, if you don't use those votes, you risk, having them taken away because people will say, oh, they don't care about it anyway. So I urge everybody in every election that you can vote, and hopefully one day that amount of elections will be wider. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Gio. I especially echo his call for everyone to go out and register to vote. Also, what he said on no taxation without representation. When I spoke to Welsh Labour MS, who was previously pushing a part of the Welsh government that pushed for residence-based voting rights in Wales, that was no taxation without representation was the exact argument they used. And look, it's in law in Wales now, so it works. I'd now like to pass on to Lara and Alex, possibly. Lara, definitely, to talk a bit more about just Lara, to talk a bit more about how this will improve democratic engagement.
Yeah, thank you. So good hearing from all of you. I love it so much. So I will just come back now to just give you guys an update. What exactly you're doing in terms of advocacy and campaigning and how you can help. So hopefully by now you're inspired, you believe in this as well, you want to see residence-based voting rights implemented in England and Northern Ireland, you know who will benefit from it, you believe in it, you want to see it work, and you'll campaign with us. So the key thing is just a recap. We've received so many quotes and videos from people that want to have their right to vote. We've got people from Brazil that live here, that work as delivery drivers. They have lived in the UK for 14 plus years, but have never been able to have a say in how their communities are run. And just like Asli said, they care about their community. This is their home. They want to participate, and it means so much to have that vote, to be able to belong. Gio again said it a more theoretical basis of what it means to have the democratic enfranchisement, and that's exactly what we want. essentially, for you to fully belong where you live, the vote is so important. So going back to the elections bill, the elections bill is currently in Parliament. It's at committee stage right now, which means that MPs on the committee are analysing the bill line by line and are considering amendments to it. We drafted an amendment, which you can start reading there. And unfortunately, it's being tabled for committee stage, but it won't be debated at committee stage. However, that doesn't mean that the cause is lost. We have, as you can see, there are lots of boxes to be ticked there. So it will have report stage. We hope that the amendment can be tabled at report stage where all of the MPs in the House of Lords can vote on. And then it goes to the House of Lords, where again, Lords can propose this amendment and hopefully vote on it as well. Now, to say that an amendment would solve all this problem would be to give you guys too much hope. Unfortunately, as much as we're campaigning and working on this, we need to remember that this is a long time campaign. We're starting to make that case for it. It's possibly the first time that this kind of campaign is happening in the UK that's like actively pushing for it with an amendment. The government is not necessarily in favor of it. We do have cross-party support. We do have MPs that are in favor of this, but so far we haven't been able to attract the support of the government on this, and we're slowly building that argument, and that's why we need your support. So that's exactly where you can come in right now. My colleagues will be posting in the chat things that you can do. So number one is you can write to your MP. You get to that letter that I've got there, and it's got basically a draft letter text of all that we've been saying so far. And you can copy and paste that onto an email, send it to your MP, and that will start helping us at least table that amendment and have that conversation in the House of Commons. Number two, you can ask your councillor to pass a motion in support of residence-based voting rights, because again, this, if it passed, it would affect councils. And if they show that support, slowly we can that there is overall support at the local level for this campaign. And thirdly, if you are a member of an organization, you'll sign our joint letter that will be sent to the MPs again, asking them to support our campaign. And that's it from me. I hope that you guys will take on some of these actions, but mostly like stay involved with us, sign up to our newsletter. Most of you should already be, otherwise you wouldn't have known about this event, but if not, please do so. Keep in touch with us on social media, and be a volunteer with us as well, because there's lots to do to keep the campaign alive. But thank you so much for being here today, taking an interest in this, and continue to campaign with us.
Hi, thank you, Lara. So now I hope everyone's a bit more informed about what the elections bill entails and what this means for EU citizens' voting rights, and about our campaign. So I'd like to encourage everyone that we still have, remind everyone about our Easy Retro, which we still have, where you can share your thoughts on residence-based voting rights. But now I'd just like to go over to Q&A to answer a few questions here. So the first question we have is from Tim, and he asks, why are the 3 Millions Young Europeans Network campaigning for voting rights in local elections rather than voting rights in general elections? This is coming off the idea that Commonwealth and Irish citizens have the rights to vote in all elections in the UK. So I'm just going to pass it over to any of our panelists to take. I'm assuming Lara. Go for it, Lara.
Yeah, so in terms of a campaign, the easiest answer is that ideally we would like to have the right to vote in general elections. But as a strategy campaign point of view, we are focusing at the local level now and then building for something bigger in the future. But for now, we're just sticking with the local level, because those rights don't exist at the local level yet. So we need to maintain what we've got, expand, and then expand further. But it's just that it's hard in itself as it is right now. So I think someone else wants to say something as well.
Cool. So now, if you'd like to.
No.
Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry, no, I didn't have a question actually.
Oh.
Yeah, that was my mistake.
Okay. No problem. So now I'd like to move on to the next question. So this is from George. He's talking about what are the best arguments we can use with the government, with the party currently in government for this campaign. So including the argument of Global Britain. So do the speakers here have any comments on what are the best arguments to use with this? Gio, do you have any thoughts on what arguments might be best as you're a Conservative Party member yourself?
Yeah, but do keep in mind that I am a Remainer who identifies himself as a Brexit skeptic. So I'm probably not that raw meat, fire breathing person you might be expecting. I would say, frankly, the argument of extending and strengthening the democracy is probably the best one that I can think of. Also, you know, you might want to point out, especially towards perhaps a bit more nationalistic citizens in the United Kingdom, that if you are looking for, you know, to strengthen, you know, not just to strengthen the democracy, but also to have more local participation, there's no reason anymore why that right to vote should be exclusively reserved to EU nationals. As a matter of fact, I think that if you go to some people and point out that, you know, it's a chance to give American citizens a right to vote, you might get sort of a hearing from some people who in the past might not have paid that much attention. Yeah, I think that, you know, if this Global Britain is to give us anything, it has to be an opportunity to expand rather than withdraw. And far too often that Global Britain seems to carry with it a withdrawal and reduction message, a shrinking message, whereas I very much think it can be used, you know, as an expansionary message. So yeah, I would say emphasizing the importance of bringing more people in, point out how, you know, democracy, as I said before, is under siege throughout the world. The conquests that we've had, as I think the last few years have shown us, that we took for granted cannot always be taken for granted, but must be defended. I am not, perhaps from that point of view, necessarily going to advocate the Thomas Jefferson line that the tree of freedom must sometimes be watered by the blood of martyrs. That was a bit of a too strong a line. I studied American constitutional law, which might explain the constant US references. But I would say that we have to keep in mind that everything, all the rights that we take for granted are not necessarily etched in stone. And the best way to protect those rights is and to defend them is by expanding them as much as possible. So I would urge that to be you know, that would be in my mind at least one of the key points to make. But then again, you know, I'm not necessarily the party line guy on these kind of matters. Sorry.
I would be curious to hear from Sanaz about like what key arguments have worked in Germany in response to those who criticize the campaign.
I think Sanaz had to go. I don't think she's here anymore. So maybe not. So if we're going to meet, so we'll move on to one of our other questions. This one was pre-submitted, and it was just about expanding on why voting eligibility shouldn't just rest on citizenship.
Cool. So I think, I mean, most of us here, like Asli, myself, Hanwu, have experiences of that. So I think if my colleagues can find the link as well, we've got some briefing papers on like the difficulties of obtaining citizenship in the UK. One was the cost of citizenship itself. The application alone costs £1,330. And then we've got barriers, as we said, about dual nationality. We've got barriers of just personal choice, people not wanting to give up their other one, or not wanting to fully become British because for whatever personal reason. But we don't think that should distract you from the right of having a say where you live about issues that affect you so directly at a local level.
Thank you, Lara. Another one of our questions, this one's a bit more specific, and it's about what about students that will leave? So I don't know if anyone wants to take that question.
Anyone? Any thoughts?
I mean, I'll just say one thing about that. I kind of touched on that briefly at the beginning. Yeah, nowadays we have a much more mobile population than we used to have even 10, 20 years ago. And as a result of that, as people move around, and students in particular are going to be one of those categories. So, you know, they'll go to university in one part of the country, then end up working and living in another part. So they are by definition one of the most transient parts of the British population. So so inevitably they would be the most vulnerable to complexities in registering to vote. So from that point of view, making the residency requirement the basis for the vote, not just the right to vote, but also to be elected, would make from that perfect sense in my point of, in my opinion. So I would say that, yeah, I mean, ultimately, one of the things the United Kingdom, I think, historically has proven to be not very good at is if I say tracking its citizens' movements, that sounds unwillingly sinister, because that's definitely not the case. However, I would point out that in most European countries in which I lived, you know, ID cards are mandatory. And when I moved from Palermo in Sicily to Milan for my university, I still had to go to the local police station to tell them I was now living in the area. So I'm not necessarily advocating those kind of controls, but we have to keep in mind that the United Kingdom has historically been lax in its procedures and processes for internal movement. And, you know, the most extreme case of that, unfortunately and tragically, was, of course, the Windrush case. But that is the most extreme and unpleasant example of a country that's never paid that much attention to its citizens inside. And as now we're moving into a new reality, students inevitably perhaps are going to be one of the test cases for any changes that we see. So yeah, that just reinforces in my mind the argument for residency-based voting rights.
Thank you, Gio. I'd also like to say in the UK, if we think about the youth turnout in the in the 2019 general election, so you turnout of 18 to 25-year-olds, the age of which many students tend to be, fall under, that was the lowest turnout of all age demographics. And I think it's a lovely idea what Gio said before about how this could encourage such things as agents of democracy. And I also think that the age of 18 to 25 is the time to build on someone's democratic engagement, because if you don't foster it when someone's 18, it's not going to be there when they're in their 60s. So I think as well, from that point of view, it's one way to really encourage democratic engagement throughout somebody's life, and not just from when they're finally settled down after university and in somewhere where they can vote. I don't know if anyone has any more thoughts on that, just shout out if you do, but otherwise we got another question here. I'm just going to have a quick somebody asked this for Michael Russell, but it'd be interesting to see if any of our panelists here could answer this. So this is from Andrea, and it's just asking if Michael Russell, who's not here, thinks Boris Johnson is not acting on expanding voting rights because he may fear the Conservative Party could be losing elections. So I feel like anyone can take this one, but it might be one more for Gio again.
Okay, yeah, the token Tory has to answer all the government questions.
Wow.
Well, I actually don't, not having had tea with Mr. Johnson in the last few years, I can't really say necessarily what's on his mind. However, I would be very cautious in assuming that every foreign national who currently cannot vote, if they were to be given the right to vote, would automatically not vote Conservative. I know lots of American friends of mine who have positions which are much more substantially to the right on many issues that I think many people might listening today might necessarily be comfortable with. So I really don't think that up until now, the issue of foreign nationals voting in national as opposed to local elections has even occurred to the government at all. I mean, keep in mind that Boris Johnson was mayor of London. and he did court a European vote. I happen to know Italian conservatives who helped organize the Italian community to vote for Boris, back in the day. Hell, I was one of them. So, we all have our sins of youth. Yeah, so when you look at it, I don't really think that the issue of foreign nationals being to vote general elections is something that's come up on the radar to any government minister lately. And again, I would work again, even then, I would work and caution against any kind of bias you may not have, or assumption rather, as to how people will vote. It's a democracy, people vote however the hell they like. And the losing side always shakes their head. As someone who's lost plenty of elections in its past, I can guarantee you the ones on the losing side will always shake their heads in dismay at the result. But I think it really is an issue that has not simply been on the radar or even a topic of discussion with the government to date. That might change in the future, who knows?
Thank you so much, Gio. Does anybody else have any other input or answers to that question? No, that's totally... Laura? Okay, go for it.
I also agree that there might be a misconception that migrants will necessarily vote against the Conservative Party. It's not the case. We've got an article, an opinion piece that someone wrote for our campaign, a Brazilian Deliveroo driver who would vote Conservative if he could. And this is, again, this is something that it just makes sense. But from what we've experienced in our conversations during the campaign, it's something new. It hasn't been talked enough. There's always a little bit of reluctance to change systems, but that's exactly why we're here, to start explaining, to start saying why it makes sense, how it's good for integration, how it's good for belonging, how it's good for it to make sense, and how there's likely to have benefits for all parties.
Great, thank you, Lara. So we're going to wrap up shortly, but I feel like I'd like to just pass back to Lara, actually, just to elaborate and reiterate our calls of action that are going to come from this event. So just what she mentioned earlier about how right now we are in this stage where we need to start drumming up public awareness. Great ways we could do this is by the actions in which Lara's going to tell you about again. Cool.
Yeah, so there's lots you can do. So one is, as I said, like, simplest thing, copy and paste the email and send to your MP. Copy and paste the email to your councillor and send to your councillor as well, asking them to pass the motion. That won't be so much hard work. I believe that you can do that. If you are even more passionate about this and you're someone who doesn't currently have the right to vote, you can send us a short video of yourself saying why you would like to have the right to vote. If you are a migrant that already has that vote and you like it and you care about it, you can also do the same, talking about why it matters to you and how you wouldn't like to not have it as a comparison. You can even go as far as help us write opinion pieces. We pitch them to local media, national media. As I said, like we've had Fabiano, who is the person who pitched an article to Conservative Home, and equally we've had people pitch it to other publications talking about why they care about the right to vote. So, and also, like, if you want to be more active volunteering with us, you can do things like prepare for this webinar. You can help us write briefing papers, do the research, all of it. You can find on our website. I'll post it there again, ourhomeourvote.co.uk. Really simple. Have a look. There's lots of briefing papers, research stuff there. All that we've been talking about is there, and we'll follow up soon after this with like the call to actions again, so you're reminded. and a link to the presentation, as some of you have asked.
And not just sharing and not just carrying out these calls of actions yourself, also sharing them with people who are affected by this, people who care about this, who care about getting more people voting, who care about getting people to have their say in public life. Just sharing it as much as possible is exactly what we need, basically. I think that's absolutely everything we wanted to cover today. So watch out for us in your inboxes in the next few days with all the calls to action you can possibly do. You can contact us if you need anything with all our information on the 3 Million and the Young Europeans Network social medias and websites, which we will link in the chat. Before we go, I'd just like to ask if any of our wonderful speakers who spoke tonight have any comments or anything they'd like to say.
Okay.
I was going to say something.
Just wanted to say thank you, and thank you for having me.
No problem. Thank you so much for speaking. So I think that's absolutely everything. So just one final thanks to everybody who's been watching, listening, contributing, interacting tonight. Everybody, even if you just commented saying you agree with something or put something a bit more details on the Easy Retro. So we'll also re-put the Easy Retro link in the chat right now. So if you'd like to share your thoughts on residence-based voting rights, we'd really like to hear them, to be honest. So follow us on social medias, we'll link those in the chat. But I think that is absolutely everything. And just once again, big thank you to everyone here tonight and involved in the process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.